Good morning.
Morning.
So please feel free to shift your seat around if you can't see very well. And those outside, if you could see the screen right there. Those of you showing up online here today, you actually have a screen here in front, so I can see you if you choose to turn on your video. So if you're interested in doing that, it's lovely to see your faces. So thank you for being here on this brisk fall morning. I think this morning it really hammered home for me that for most of the summer, actually, I was feeling this constant low-level dread about the heat. This kind of like, oh, it may never stop. It may never stop. So I feel really grateful to be a little uncomfortable, a little bit cold this morning, and return to the womb of the bowl of Eugene. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Genjo. I'm a monk here in training, and for this practice term, the Shuso, you got a fancy little robe upgrade here. And for those of you who are wondering, this symbolizes, back in olden days where the color and cloth didn't fix so well as it does today, that the Shuso has been practicing so long and so diligently that all the color of this particular, this part of the robe gets a lot of rub on it, that the color has flowed out, all over your hands, all over all the other things touching it. So that's part of the symbolism of what you see there. So this morning I'll be giving a talk called it's a type of talk called a way-seeking mind talk. It's really a time for a longtime practitioner in this community and other Zen communities to share about their walking of the path. So for me personally, how was it? How is it? Maybe where am I going? What were the inspirations at a certain point? Did those wax and wane? Where did the heart that seemed to yearn for liberation feel like it really came from? Is it mine? Was it there before I've had a sense of even who I was? I think we can all look back into our own lives and have an interesting sense if you're here in this particular space today. What drew you to this? We're not a Buddhist nation, we're a Christian nation. So it's always fun to go around and ask people, what are you doing here? There's an oddity in your own heart and life in a certain sense, and to share in that with others is a great joy. So before sharing particulars, I wanted to ground us within a shared image. And I wonder if you've had the pleasure to be walking along, say, outside and maybe a warm, but say not fiery hot summer day, and encounter a weed that's just majestically bursting through the sidewalk. And somehow, just that much soil. You don't even know how much, because you can't see it down there in the depths. And it's getting enough water and somehow making its way through. And for me, I get this sense of beauty and also a sense of tragedy. Kind of, it looks so hard. Why couldn't you be somewhere else? Or say if you're an apple tree in Kogen's orchard or a tomato plant in Issei's garden, that seems like the sweet spot if you were a plant, But, you fall where you fall, and you find the soil that you can. You look for the water, you reach towards the sun. Another similar image is I was kayaking once. I believe I was up in Canada, and there's a very rocky coast, and a tree had fallen across a ravine, right? Already a beautiful kind of scene. And it must have been a 20 or 30 foot span. It was quite long, and just perched there. And then right in the center, the log was starting to sag. There was a tree growing. I believe, and it wasn't a baby tree. It was like an adolescent tree. So maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and its roots were sort of dangling down, looking for the earth that it wasn't going to find. Right? The tree had started to decompose. I believe they call them nurse logs, and it become a kind of soil that a tree can live on. In the redwood forest, you see a lot of these, and the huge stumps of massive trees that had fallen. Right? The sense of precarious precariousness of life, and also the vigorous to be like, well, I landed here, I'm going to go forward with what I've got. So I think I bring up these kinds of images because they really, for me, they center on what feels to me the heart of path, the centrality of living and dying. And I sort of have an aversion to the word spiritual, actually. It feels a little bit, I think, in our culture, that word comes off to me as a little ethereal, like it's a little bit of a choice to be spiritual or not. The way it sort of strikes for me is that we're all on the hook of life and death, and there are vast unknowns, and we have real concrete decisions we have to make with our life, and also flows coming through us that we don't really have decisions about at the same time. And that all meets in what we call, I think, a standard human life. One more image to offer you all therein. This backyard used to be just full of elephant garlic. So it's a kind of leek, it feels like, leek garlic situation right in the middle. Pretty smelly. I like them. I think they're tasty, but I love garlic and onions and all that stuff monks really shouldn't be eating, so they say. So it's quite a miracle there isn't a ton of elephant garlic back there, especially because the first owner of the house, he encouraged it to grow, and it already grows like a weed. So anywho, thank you to our diligent gardeners who've really worked on that over the years. But we had this old shed, a tool shed that's no longer there, crack in the concrete, and we'd leave the doors open in the summertime while we're going in and out, getting the lawnmower, and there was a stalk of elephant garlic that would come up every summer in that same spot, spring and summer. And it was so withered and unhappy. It was just struggling so much, hardly getting any water. I think I thought about watering it a couple times. I don't think I ever did. But it got just enough sun to, I think, just continue on year after year. And, the vigorousness of life despite the situation. And so I think for each of us, where's the soil? Where's the water? And where's the sunlight? We're constantly attuning to that, constantly finding our own way. And so with our life, no matter where we've landed, no matter what place in the soil or in the concrete we've managed to put down some roots, meager as they may be, I think it's a great gift, a great exploration, and also rooted on sturdy ground. And I think in classic Buddhist terms, we might call that, we're all rooted in life and death. To be alive means to be pressed up directly against death. Fragility and vigorousness meeting perfectly. So just a light note to start things off on. But before sharing more specifics about kind of my heart and unfolding my life through this tradition, being in front of you today in the sort of the shape of a monk, just a sort of overview of my life, 30 years on this planet. So I grew up in the early 90s, in a suburb outside of Portland. My dad, he started a construction company and was growing that most of the time I was alive and as a youngin'. My mom was at home slugging it out with spending much of her time raising 3 kiddos. So my older siblings and I, brother and a sister. And some important, aspects of my life as a young person is I went to a Catholic school for 13 years, which I feel really grateful for. Some people have horror stories in there. We have a common joke about recovering Catholics here, but for me, I felt really blessed to be in a Catholic community. And although I never found myself particularly religious or drawn to that form of worship, veneration, pouring out spirituality, I did feel so lucky to be around many kind people, many people who walked the talk of that faith. My dad jokes that it was sort of, I think, his main energy to send us there And he said, I want you to get a good education, and they'll talk to you about religion and sex, so I don't have to. And sorry, Dad, they only talked to us about religion. They didn't really talk to us about sex, or they did a really poor job of it, I would say. So I also did Taekwondo for 9 years. So when I was 5, I started that and went through and received my black belt when I was 14. And that was really, I think, my mom's decision. I was sort of a hellion as a kiddo, and always kicking and fighting, and every stick I came across, I felt like we were destined to be with each other. And fighting with my sister a lot, and I would say that she was just bent out of shape, that she got dislodged as the cutest new member of the family, so I was just defending myself. But so my mom was like, we can fight with this kid, this little tornado, or we can, put some rails on that and put him in Taekwondo. And I feel really grateful. It was such an important part of my life. And I think even with those 2 arcs, there's an interesting narrative about how I could become a Zen monk, that the high church and ritual aspect and spiritual essence of Christianity, all of that meeting the Eastern, really embodied physical ethic present in Taekwondo, and also the really important, the strong importance of a relationship with a teacher, right? That comes together really nicely, I think, in being a Zen monk. So fun narrative in there. So after high school, I went to the University of Oregon. I studied sociology and psychology, and that's about the time I found Buddhism. And I started living here at the temple, maybe 2 or 3 years after coming to the university. During that time, I traveled and lived in India on 2 different occasions, total about 8 months or so. My original intention was to go hang out with Buddhists, right? That's where the Buddha was from, northern India, southern Nepal. And it turns out there are way more Christians than Buddhists in India. Did you all know that? Yeah, I didn't. Did you? Yeah, it was amazing. It was like, what are all these Christian churches doing here? It really seems like Buddhism got sort of incorporated into the conglomeration stew of religious practices we call Hinduism here in the West. So Buddhism was like, great, yeah, another form of Krishna, Vishnu, just another emanation of the divine. So anywho, side note there. Also, while I was at the university, I worked at a summer camp in Vermont. So it was a camp specially created to help hold kids who were diagnosed with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, had particular needs therein. A really special time in my life. Incredibly challenging, the kind of you're just on top of each other all the time in this small cabin, not too unlike being a monk here living at the temple or at a monastery. And after graduating, I moved to Denver for a year, where I was a manny for a family with 3 boys. When I started, they were 3, 6, 7, and 7. That was a pretty big learning curve. And now they're 10, 12, and the oldest twins, they're turning 14 in a couple weeks. So it's a real joy. I'm still in contact with them, and we still have great connection. And about that time, I was really churning over what it could be to be a monk. And so a year after moving to Denver, I decided to come back and become a postulant here at the temple. So I came back, and about a year later, on October 2nd, 2016, I was ordained as a novice. So yesterday was my 5-year anniversary of ordination. So 6 of my short life lived as a monk. Pretty exciting. And so since then, I've either really been here or training in Japan. That's been the arc of my life. And so there really I've just given sort of the bones, the arc of my world, and looking back and thinking about my own path in the Dharma, there are a few significant moments I'd like to share with you all. So again, even though I got tossed into Taekwondo as a young kid, I'd say that only channeled a certain amount of my aggression and intensity, and I'm a pretty natural extrovert, so I was class clown, all of my energy just pouring out, looking to sort of latch on and grab other human beings and to find a line and coerce people into crossing that line with me. That seemed kind of the way I operated. And I got into paintballing at some point around 6th grade. People know what this is, right? There's like this ball, these little tiny balls of paint, and you put some compressed air on the back of that, and then you go and basically play war games with each other. I think it was a good outlet of my energies, though I spent way too much money on that. Anywho, so after the first time I went, this is a big wind-up for something that's very important, so please stick with me. I went paintballing for the first time, and I got shot a couple times, and twice on like the inner thigh, which is not a great place to get shot with paintballs, and they leave pretty big marks or welts. And so my dad thought this was pretty funny, and he was like, "Mark, let's take a picture of you, hold your gun and make like a real serious face and like show your war wounds on your inner thigh." And so I was like, "Okay, Dad, sounds like a great idea." I think he wanted to send it to his friends and his mom. So we do that, and I have this picture, and for some reason I think it's a good idea to show my friend and my sixth grade buddy, and I bring it to a Halloween carnival at my school, and I show him, and he's like, "Oh, could I hold on to that for a bit?" And I say, "Sure, Evan, why not?" And of course, later in the night, I'm going, "Hey, how's everyone doing?" And I see he's showing the cutest girls in class this picture, and so I'm just mortified, right? It's the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. And so I run away, fuming. I don't know what to do. I'm so angry. And I end up in what we called the grotto. So it's a Catholic school, and out in front of a really old brick building that was probably constructed, 30s, 40s, there's a stone circle around a massive maple tree. And the maple tree is about this big. And then there's an alcove that's been built out of these stones leveled on each other. And say it's about 15 feet tall with a statue of Mother Mary in there. So I'm sort of hiding out in there, huffing and puffing for a while, my breath just coursing. And I just remember being furious and feeling so trapped. And then my breath just slowed down a bit. And I stayed there, had no intention of leaving that place. My breath kept slowing and slowing and slowing until I'd say what came over me was what felt like an unreasonable calm. I could still feel all of my anger and my frustration at the situation, but it was like it was miles away. I was still connected to it, but it wasn't right in the center. And I was safe. I felt safe in the darkness, which also feels unreasonable because I'm pretty sure I was afraid of the dark till I was like 16. So there, just in the dark, hiding out. And it was like an inhuman aliveness was present. Or maybe we could say like transhuman, more than human, connected with the human, but also not utterly concerned with my human affairs, my little narratives, my social narratives of suffering. A real presence. And so I don't remember that really shifting my life very much in the moment, but looking back, it's really significant. And that kind of a situation happened a couple more times in my life. So I think really a root of this practice of encountering body and letting all our human concerns be present, but not centered upon. Somehow I feel really blessed and lucky to see that there might have been a seed of that in there beyond my ability to cultivate that. So as the years rolled on into middle and high school, I really didn't consider myself spiritual at all. I do remember really enjoying singing in Catholic Mass. I don't think I admitted that to anyone. That wasn't a very cool thing to feel. It didn't align with other parts of my identity I was putting a lot of energy into cultivating, but I really appreciated that. And actually, the moment you held hands with people, there's something about that was so electrifying and intense and sort of like maybe frightening. And you really, like, before you go to Mass, right, you sort of plan out who you're going to sit next to because that was so significant. And so in this time in middle and high school, and while I won't go into it in this talk, I experienced and was experiencing what I think it's very fair to call trauma. Acute suffering, persistent, gnawing, jarring and destabilizing. And I think that time in my life, it goes really close to going off the rails. So at 14, I was smoking weed and sneaking out at night and coming back to the house at 4 a.m. and sort of felt fairly wrecked from that lifestyle, particularly in the summertime. A funny story there. So basically, I'd have to sleep sometime. And so from basically, 5 to noon, I would sleep. And one day, my brother and I shared a room while I was growing up. And he comes back in at maybe 10:30 and 11 to do something with his life. And he wakes me up. And of course, I'm furious and kind of yelling at him. And he says something at the end of our sort of little spat. He says, "Mark, I hope you can't go back to sleep for hours." And I say, "Yeah, Scott, well, I hope you die." And he was just like, "Bro," he slams the door and leaves the room. And I think that day he told my mom, he was like, "Look, this is why Mark's a wreck. He's out every night. Come on, we got to do something about this. This is unreasonable." So I thank you, Scott and family, for putting up with me. And so into probably later in high school years, a fair amount of drinking and partying. And it was very clear, really just spending a lot of energy trying to numb the pain and sorrow and anger that was gnawing in my life that had no other place. I had no ability to tend to it. And I feel like at that time there was a constellation of significant events that feel like they really saved me or helped keep me centered. Maybe early in my junior year of high school, I hit a low, and I remember week after week, I just hoped I would get invited to a party on the weekend. It was that was my driving force. So dropping hints and hanging out with the older kids I was close with, being like, "Okay, so what's going on, team? What are we up to?" And I was home alone one afternoon, just really feeling the bleakness of that life. And I, like any good, I guess, straight Catholic boy, I prayed to God for a girlfriend. And he, 2 weeks later, I met my high school sweetheart. So really, I think I should be giving this talk to you all as a Catholic. He provided. And, it's kind of funny, but, I was at a place where I couldn't feel love and connection to my young mind. That was a place where I could unfold something that was tender and caring and vulnerable that I wasn't able to muster in any other place. And I feel really lucky. It was, for that time in my life, a beautiful relationship that activated my heart in a certain way. And also, at maybe a number of months later, there's a retreat that my school puts on for all of the juniors. And I think it's a very classic style of retreat in the Catholic community, and we called it Encounter. And so basically, long story short, is people who have been young people, so seniors mostly, who have done this retreat before, or sort of, they sign up to be the leaders, and they model what it is to share your story, to share your life, and beauty and suffering of it all. And to meet that, to cultivate a container where together you could meet that with love and acceptance, right? So quite powerful for young people, I think. And also sprinkle in a good bit of sleep deprivation and a secret conspiracy where they ask all your family and older friends for kind letters to be written about you and then spring that on you at some point. It was a turning moment in my life. And particularly, I remember I had a friend in the 6th grade, so just a kiddo, who at that point my narrative was they got weird and we stopped being friends. And then 7 years later, we're at this retreat together, not friends, we sort of have our separate spheres. And through that retreat process and the vulnerability cultivated there, I learned, they come to share that around that time in 6th grade is when they started being sexually abused. And also learning that the amount of sexual abuse and physical abuse, emotional abuse was going on all over the place, even in a fairly well-to-do Catholic community. The amount of suffering was profound. Especially even the people who seemed like they most had it together were suffering so much just to keep that wheel turning. I remember these women who, for me, they were just so beautiful and popular and talented and smart. And I thought, like, wow, what a great, shape to be in life. You seem to have it all. And lo and behold, suffering there too. So big turning moment in my life. I felt like I gained a purpose with my everyday meeting of people, that there's a deep responsibility in encountering anyone. You cannot know what is on the other side of what you see with another person. So you have to take care, was what I took away from that. So I graduated from high school and broke up with my partner, or I could say it went up in flames, or some sort of blast. It was a pretty intense breakup, and it turns out I had one of them codependent relationships, I think we might call them. So baked into what I thought was just love and beauty and all the good stuff happened to be a good amount of fear and need. And lots of avoidance too. It was all baked right in there. And it took me a number of months, I think as a freshman in college, feeling into my pain, to realize that was a big part of it. Not just the loss of my relationship with this one person, but the fact that I lost a strong, like almost coping mechanism for my suffering. And that's a pretty disturbing thought. And I think I realized pretty strongly that I knew that if I didn't attend to that, I would simply just continue wiping that over my entire world. The next lover I encounter, just be seeking that out, looking for a place to place my pain, asking someone else to hold that in a sense. And so it put a fire under me. I started staying in on the weekends, and people go out for parties. I'd be like, no thanks, I'm good, and stay in and read Marcus Aurelius, and put on my philosophizer, searching heart and mind, and creating containers to hold my pain. And in 1 week, the word Zen was said around me a whole bunch of times. It was really odd, you're so Zen, they call her the Zen master, and just the pop culture references. And it got through my thick skull, and I said, I wonder what that is. I had no idea it was even Buddhism. And so like any good college student, I went and I checked out a couple books. I've never found them again, actually. They're quite not common or popular Zen books. And I was really struck by the fact that they said, look, we can't tell you what to do or what the good way to live is, but there's been a tradition that's cultivated a way for you just to meet your own heart and to look directly into your own demons and angels and face them and go from there. That's where the juice gets in as we know it. And it really struck me. I was really moved. And not moved enough to actually start sitting meditation, of course. So I had actually Googled Zen Buddhist monasteries. The word monastery was really used in the books I was reading. And I found Great Vow, our friends who have a monastery west of Portland. And they have a free summer program. So I signed up to go be there for a month without having gone to any other place. And about 2 weeks before, I realized I should probably sit meditation once before I go. That would be a good thing. And I still remembered I was in my room at my parents' house, and I didn't look up any videos or do any research. I think I'm sincere but not very clever or resourceful as a human being, and persistent. And so my knees are like straight up in the air, and I set my phone timer right next to me for 15 minutes. It's like, okay, I'm gonna do the thing. So I was sitting there, and pretty quickly I ascertained that this is awful. This is terrible. There's nothing good about this, and people like to do this. It was just absurd to me. And so, but I'm like, no, I'm going to this monastery for goodness sakes. I gotta do this. And then I thought my timer's broken. It's been 25 minutes or 40 minutes. And so I finally decided to look down. It's just like a movie. It goes 3, 2, 1. beep, 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 beep. And I remember everything just dropping away. Like all of my little wrestling or grappling with the situation. My belly just opened and softened. And it was just so clear. It's like, oh, my mind is an awful place to be. I really dislike it here. And that's why I'm constantly pouring out into entertainment, schlocky entertainment, playing tons of video games, just looking for the next, social encounter to keep this little tight, narrow wheel of sensation and, activity going to keep me from really being centered here. And so I don't think that realization didn't really help make meditation easier, but I do think I felt fortunate to be tied in a certain way. I knew something that this was an important thing I had to do. And so I went to the monastery, and it was definitely the hardest thing I've done in my life. I left the monastery, or I left the meditation hall the first morning of sitting at 4 o'clock in the morning because I felt like I was going to throw up. I was sitting there, and everything in me just said, this can't be done. This can't be done. You can't be here. So I left, and the head monk came out and was like, how you doing? It's like, I think I'm going to throw up. He's like, great, come back in when you're ready. It was just no fanfare about the situation. For those of you who know him, this is Jogen at Great Vow. I feel really lucky. And so I sort of wandered back in at some point and tied a rope and made it through. And the monks were so moving to me. I felt like they could respond with sincerity even when they were under pressure. And they also could smile with their whole being in a way that I didn't think I was able to. And when I asked them, what's going on? Were you always like this? They'd all point. They'd say, oh, this is the practice. This is anything good and beautiful you see cultivated here. This has been nurtured through this thing I've found and been able to pour myself through. So I won't say much more about my time at the monastery, but I'll share a couple of dreams I had while I was there. And one of them was I came down an elevator in a massive skyscraper that was under construction. And there were tons of construction men in orange vests and hard hats working on the foundation. I sort of wandered out there, and I looked up at the stars. Another dream I had was I was up the ocean in kind of the Oregon coast, flat, sandy beach, and there were some seagulls flying in the air. I was like, wow, so beautiful, so fun. Some majestic wind and the waves slowly rolling in. And I thought, wow, I wish I could be a seagull flying just like that. I said, oh, well, shucks. Sort of turned and sort of walking away. And then I thought, wait, I'm going to do that. So I turned back toward the ocean, and I started running, and I jumped, and I turned into a seagull. I just did it. I didn't think about it. It wasn't really planned. And then I still remember what it was like, just a few really good swoops towards the water, coming back up, turning again. Well, obviously, you could see it's a really important time for me, important shifting. So while I was there, they're like, you came from Eugene, right? We know this guy. His name is Genjo. We think he's pretty good. So you should go see him. So I came back to Eugene and continued going to school, and eventually moved in after a year or two. And I would say I started my career in sleeping through hundreds of hours of Zazen. I was way too busy as a student. I was a full-time student. I had a part-time job. I had a girlfriend at the time. I was playing on the ultimate Frisbee team, and also sitting here Zazen in the mornings and taking classes in the evening. And we also had a roommate while you were here at the temple, so just tumbling of human beings and hours, and I was trying to learn blues dancing at some point. I mean, it was all just absurd. I think in another way, turning a wheel of anxiety and activity to just keep it going, and many beautiful aspects of those activities, but not quite settled. I do remember things moving. I would still try and be a normal civilian person, human being, while living at the temple and hanging out with my Frisbee team, and I'd still go to parties. And I remember things really starting to move when I'd end up at a party and it'd be like, man, I just really don't want to be here. I'd go on a Frisbee tournament, and that was like basically what you did. You went to this party in the evening, the van took you, you didn't really have a choice. It might have even been at the house you were staying at. And of course, I had my trusty Thich Nhat Hanh book with me. So I was like, I'm just gonna go find a bedroom and hull up in there and sit cross-legged and read Thich Nhat Hanh. So I'd go do that, and drunk people would stumble in through the night, and they'd be like, whoa, like, what's going on? What are you up to? And I'd be like, oh, I'm just reading about Buddhism, hanging out. And they'd be like, really? Really? And I'd say like, close the book and say, what do you know about that? Is that interesting to you? And they'd be like, yeah. And we'd start having this honest, sharing conversation. And then we'd come to this kind of settled place of sharing, and more drunk people would stumble into the room. And they'd be, that you could just see in their eyes, something would totally soften. And they'd be like, can I be a part of this? And I'd be like, we're talking about Buddhism, and we're really listening to each other. Come and join. And then we'd keep that wheel turning. And eventually the room would just start filling up with people, until finally it would sort of spill over, and someone would be like, dude, all these spiritual freaks in here. And then, the spell would break and it'd sort of pour back in. But something was so amazing in that time that you just saw people are yearning to be seen. People are yearning to have a steady, safe place to pour out their real ambition for what their human life could be. And that happened a number of times where eventually people are playing that game beer pong, and there are just 3 people left at the beer pong table, not even enough to play. And people had formed a circle in the living room and were just sharing. So I felt, that that was where I wanted to bet my money. So living at the temple in that time of busyness and fullness, I remember it was really hard in many ways. It was challenging, but also really rewarding. And I remember many ups, many highs, being like, I've got it. It's going so great. And then the converse to that, big slide. Like, what am I doing? These cold, dark mornings that at the temple, I'm so tired. And it was like I was condemned to a dungeon for a couple hours. It just felt really absurd at times. But the truth is that I loved my teacher and my friends who were doing that together. And the suffering found in that container is different. And gave it significance. Like it gave my misery its own breath, its own life. It could smile a shaky smile. And it could find fascination in flickering candles. And there was a subtle learning that you didn't have to have a good picture of how to go forward, but you could just immediately take refuge in your community, in an upright back, and a soft belly. No matter what, material seemed to be on your plate that day. You didn't have to know the way through, but you could trust the immediate placing of your foot. I remember really feeling caught when I asked Ejo one morning in a private meeting, fundamentally, what do you have to teach me? I think there's a point where I was really sharpening my samurai sword, or trying to. Fundamentally, master, what do you have to teach me? And he just said that fundamentally, I have nothing to give you. Fundamentally, nothing to give. The night before I took the precepts, or the ceremony called Jukai, where you in front of the community, you could say maybe officially become a Buddhist, receive the ethical code and say that becomes my vow to become a Buddha. The night before I had a dream where I fell out of the sky and into a fjord. And I think I'm saying that right. A body of water like a lake that's been carved out by a glacier over, I don't know how many years that really takes, many. I fell from the sky and I landed in the water and I was suspended. And there were these whale-like creatures, big, very big, and kind of with ungraspable bodies. They were a little bit hazy at the edges. And they felt that I landed there, but they didn't turn and center on me. But I could feel them saying, you can be here. You are welcome to be here. So I think after that, really, after taking the precepts and being here more, many things happened in that kind of basic narrative of my life, kind of time and space, linear time and space situation of my life. But ordination was a central thing in my eyes and in my heart, kind of basically after taking the precepts, I would say. And although, that shift in your life is pretty significant and it's full of questions and challenges, but it really felt clear to me for a long time that that's what I wanted to do. I had found a way that had basically given me my life. Saved my life sounds a bit dramatic, but not too far from the mark. It was something that deepened my heart in a way that I just never found anywhere else. And the next point on that is because someone and many people had made the decision to give their life to a certain shape to make it visible so that people could see it, that people could come to it. It could be recognized as a gate. And they lived that gate. They chose to live that tradition, the forms. And I hadn't found anything else that I'd fallen in love with yet. So, what else was I going to do, I'd say? And I think to love what gives more love in your life is easy. And so magical, at least in my understanding of what it means to take up that shape, and what I've seen in my seniors and other people who have done it, that although they seem to become heavy with that burden, even it's a lot of cloth. I thought I had reached the maximum when we sewed this, and then we were we're going to sew another piece of fabric on top of all your other fabric. And then further, when you all see Ejo's mountain seat robe that we've sewed him, that's a heavy piece of cloth, right? And then Jakuin just is sewing him like a wool robe on top of that. So anywho, the amount of cloth is endless, I think. And so although, there's a kind of burden in a life as a monk, and as I understand it, like magic, many of these people also seem wondrously free. Wondrously free through the burden, with the burden. And so after ordination, probably the next significant thing in my world was going to train in Japan. So I trained in 2 separate monasteries and visited, I guess I could say 4 total. But 2 significant chunks at a monastery in Nagasaki, southern Japan, and a monastery in Okayama, more centrally located Japan. The first one for 9 months and the second for 5 months. I feel bad asking people after they go on vacation, how was it? Koshin just got back from Denmark. Be like, how was it? Vacations are just important magical experiences where you're transported to other worlds. In a monastery, people come back. How was it? Was it fun? Did you learn a lot? And really, it's a powerful grinder in many ways. A way I image it is it's like your heart, mind, and body are spread out and laid thin over like a smooth piece of white granite. And maybe people have different experiences than I do, but for me, most of it was just being made uncannily aware of my own failings, conceits, and petty and sneaky graspings. And maybe a challenge in there, and also the beauty in there, is everyone sees it. Zen, the style of training at a Zen monastery is for you and the other trainees to just be totally on top of each other all the time. So I slept a few feet apart from another guy. One tatami mat was between us. In the olden days, you were really just tatami mat to tatami mat. If there were more monks, that would have been the case. We have a sort of day room that we hang out in. We're eating meals together, we're showering together, we're working together, we're working on ceremonies together. Everything on top of each other all the time. And so you see everyone around you, you get to see their best and you get to see their worst. And it just cannot be hidden. It can't be hidden. So in a way, that's the challenge, and I think also the medicine of our style of practice. And I think many of us here, looking at many of you in this room, we have the blessing of that medicine and challenge too. A refrain I have in my mind right now is that, you're not fantastic, but you're reasonable. I think many of us fall under that category, right? And that gets hammered home, I think. So I think a lot of my pure ideas of myself and an idea of a beautiful practice of some sort of pristine perfection. My name means, Genjo means original purity. I definitely strive for being pure. And yet, what's before the idea of making a shape pure? I think something to do with being reasonable but not fantastic has something to do with that. And so the Zen forms, they help us not to distinguish between people because they either have great vice or great virtue, but rather, you're just next to the guy next to you and you have to rely on them and they have to rely on you. And really, I think it helps bring forward the heart of the Mahayana, and I think it's not different when you sit down in meditation. In our own hearts and beings, we have some rascally members of our assembly. We can't make them leave. They're not going anywhere. But we can make offerings to them. We can be kind to them and say, oh, you're reasonable. You're totally wired in this weird way because of all these causes and conditions. And I see that. And I'm not going to try and beat you into a different shape. So I feel really grateful for my time at the monastery. And also, have some questions about if having Westerners go train there is all that great of an idea. I still remember walking in to sort of our day room at one of the monasteries and seeing all of these young Japanese monks sitting with their cell phones in front of them and a box of sweets that they had been sent from home. They were all just totally glued in. So I think there's a way in which sort of the ancient container that was crafted isn't thriving so well in many places. And it can become to have such intense practice in one sense, moving through, such intense, it's just intense. I think you all get it. A lot of sitting, a lot of being on top of each other, a lot of ritual, and also an unwillingness to really accept, some wisdom of olden times, how to be simple and embrace, a kind of poverty that can give great ease, actually. That there's some treacherousness in there, I'd say, for me, in my own heart. And I'd say my current inspiration happens to be you all. There's a teacher at one of the monasteries. I'd go ask him questions. He barely spoke any English, but I'd type it up in English, throw it through a Google Translator, and we'd sort of make our way through a conversation. And at some point I just said, what sustains you? You know, he spent 4 years as an important teacher at the head monastery where he left his family to do that. And he was sort of asked and said he would willingly go help this other monastery, the one I was at, for another 4 years. And left his family and his home, and a place you could just tell he really loved. And he went because he knew he could be an example. He knew he could be helpful. And I said, why do you do this? What's your inspiration right now? And he said, it's you all. He said, it's you all and how lucky we are that we can just, when the bell rings, we can stand and adjust our robes. And when the sounding block sounds for meals, we can just stand and go eat our food together. That at the base of life, we can take refuge in something so simple and so present that it's so hard for us to find it. And he said, you all rascally monks. There was a monk there, he's an Italian guy. He said he didn't even really want to be a monk. So wild. But he said, the founder of our school, which is true, he said, it's better than not being a monk. So I actually probably shouldn't say that in a Western context. That's not helpful. Like, sort of purge that from your ears maybe. But there's something really true in there. To go live in a simple way and to pour your life through that, I think is a powerful experiences. And there are amazing communities in the West where if you want to go live a monastic life, you can. And just being here for retreats, you can also get a certain taste of that. And so with you all, I feel kind of on the daily a little bit of a joyful resignation. Many of you, to me, in my personal opinion, you're a pain in the butt. And living here, I find, is a constant refrain of having your own will thwarted. Right? Which I think actually, in general, that's the way of living. Your own images are always so, have a kernel of truth, but are mostly unhelpful if you want to enact them in their completion. And I think living in community really highlights that, it puts it on overdrive. And so I feel it's a blessing to actually get bowled over again and again in rubbing up and moving forward in practice and in life with all of you. So I like that. Playful resignation, perhaps. And so what I said, in many sense, or in a strong sense, I had was that ordination was relatively simple and straightforward and easy. I do feel like I'm starting to sense more and more my teacher indeed has tricked me. And so I think I'll end with a quick poem. Though earnest and inviting, I sense a well-crafted poker face. I feel the daemons and ogres playing just beyond the veil, out of reach, yet watching. His palms open and empty, sleeves rolled back, yet truly nothing is hidden. And so playing the part, I don a jester's garb and pull heaps of gold from the river, arranging it in piles on the bank, enticing people, come down for a swim. No one comes. The joke has always been free. And all the while, the great assembly roaring with laughter. Thank you. I think we have time for a few questions. Just one or two, maybe. Comments, that's fine too. Cindy?
How am I ever going to come to you with without knowing, maybe they're thinking that I'm a pain in your butt.
Yeah. I would start to look at how I'm a pain in the butt.
Or the other way around. I mean, am I going to go to you and I'm thinking, he's thinking that about me?
Yeah. I think the other side of that, though, is the trap we set for ourselves when we think we can only be honest if someone is liking me. I can only be honest if someone, only has positive views of me. And that I can only have deep relationships only if sort of my cognitive holding of our relationship looks good. So I think that's a real blessing and treasure of Sangha, and that actually, so much more for me, that the harmony of a Sangha looks like conflict. I think it looks like becoming much more skilled in conflict and being able to discern where the heart of a problem is and not being caught on the way on small fetters of what's really the point. And so as we churn in the fact of being like, I'm not going to have the same kind of relationship with everyone. I'm not going to like everyone. I'm not going to be liked by everyone. As we really settle on that, it's also greatly freeing for inside my own being. I'm not going to have a perception of myself that I will always appreciate. And yet, if we put our eyes, keep our eyes on that, but also shoot past it. And we say, but there's a harmony that looks like meeting those barriers. I think if we keep that in mind, I think that's a walking of path, and that's a cultivation of Sangha for awakening.
Genjo.
Told you.
I want to thank you for saying hello to me when I got back after 12 years of being gone back east. And I want to thank you for telling me about pouring the water during oryoki, and so as not to spill it. And I want to really thank you from the bottom of my heart for holding the form and your journey, your path that you just explained, because it just holds that space for me to carry on. Kasho.
What you say there, I think what we have in this tradition, that it's maybe different from the way that spirituality is explored in community for other faith traditions. But the forms in many ways can be this kind of, I don't know what the right word is, a choreography that has a right and a wrong. And it invites us to the possibility of just being wrong, and that it's a kind of objective thing, and you have to sort of die to that. I bowed in the wrong spot. No one else moved. Great, I see that feedback. I know now. And we get to do that with each other. We get to be the instruments of sharing and offering a way forward. And when you're doing oryoki next to someone, maybe just going a hair slower than you would, so that someone can pick up a move they haven't been getting. And it's such a sweet way forward. And there's also times where you go as fast as you usually can and will, because someone doesn't really have the idea that they need to be a little bit quicker to stay with the group, right? We're not always just coddling people. We're saying, what's harmonizing with the group? And so there's a concreteness to our way together. And so I really invite anyone here thinking about becoming more mixed up in things, that to learn the forms is, in one sense, it's just to learn the forms. In another sense, it's to get the opportunity of being right and being wrong and learning from the people around you, and that becomes, I don't want to say it's an enactment of, I think, the thing we're trying to do with our own hearts and other people's hearts all the time. They're not separate from each other. And I think that's part of one of the breezes flowing of our way together. Thank you. Maybe one more.